It's the Metro on 1019 WDET. I'm Nick Austin.
And I'm Tia Graham. Today on the program, we'll explore why many Muslims have been grieving during this year's Ramadan with a story from WDET's Nargis Rahman.
But first, on the Metro, expensive home prices have a number of people upset. In Detroit, it has led some to blame out-of-town speculators, claiming they are buying up most of the homes in the city. But according to a new report by Alsup, that's not as big of an issue as some claim. In a Substack article titled "Owned Away from Home, Out-of-State Ownership of Detroit's Housing Stock Sits at 5%, which is aligned with the national average. What's more, a growing share of Detroiters have been owning more of the housing stock in the city over the past few years. To discuss this recent report and what it means, we have the author Alex Alsup here. Alex, welcome to the Metro.
Thank you so much. So glad to be here.
Yeah, happy to have you also, because I think a lot of us had this feeling that it was maybe out-of-state actors thinking they could just buy up a bunch of cheap houses, cheap property, and it was rising prices for us here. But you looked at the numbers and homes in other cities, and you said that they were owned in kind of a similar rate. So were you surprised by what you found?
Yeah, I think so. It was interesting to see that Detroit, as you said, is sort of in line with the national average on out-of-state ownership of the city's housing stock. What's far more common here, as is the case in the rest of the country as well, is housing stock that's owned by somebody in Michigan but outside of Detroit. That's more like 10 to 15% of the housing stock in the city that's owned, in Michigan but outside Detroit. And again, that's consistent with what we see nationally as well, is that in-state ownership in a different at some distance from the home is far more common than out-of-state ownership.
So how does a finding like that contextualize the role of speculators in the city? Because what I might initially think is, fair enough, we're in line with other places around the nation, but maybe because of our unique challenges, it still has a more disparate or rough impact. Even if it's someone in the same state, if they're buying up stock in a place that they're not living, it could still have the same effect. So how would you contextualize the roles of speculators in the city based on what you saw in the data?
Yeah, absolutely. It's still a significant portion of the housing stock that's owned at some distance from housing itself in the city. And then, of course, speculation, the owned away from home report looks specifically at housing stock. Speculation, of course, extends, it includes housing stock, but extends well beyond housing stock into other kinds of property as well. So there's a lot of vacant land that's held by speculators. There's commercial property, industrial property, vacant homes, vacant structures, things like that as well. So, the overall footprint of speculation, the overall impact of speculation on the city is significant still, and extends beyond just what's owned in housing stock.
Yeah, and like we said, this is the Chargeback, your Substack that goes through this data, but can you just let listeners understand a little bit what percentage of people own property in Detroit but don't live in the city, and how that breaks down for you, just so that we get an idea of the specifics here?
Sure. So, total in terms of housing stock, I think it's around 25% of housing stock that's either owned out of state or owned by someone in Michigan but outside of Detroit. Yeah. And this was all put together in a report called "Owned Away from Home," which I put together with a colleague of mine at Regrid, which is the company where I work, and we looked at this issue nationally as well as in Detroit.
Yeah, and speaking of nationally, the one kind of exception to this trend that we did see in those numbers you provided was a bunch of people in Florida owning homes on Detroit's east side. It seems to be an odd outlier. Is there anything that you pulled away from that, or how does that look, and what do you think it tells us about the market?
Yeah, that's a really interesting one. When you look at out-of-state ownership of Detroit property, it's down in just about every state in the country over the last 5 years, except for Florida. So Florida ownership of Detroit properties is up about 35% since 2018. And then if you look specifically at ownership of Detroit properties in South Florida, sort of, the greater Miami-Dade area, that's up 90% from 2018, from around 1,100 homes that were owned in South Florida in 2018 to over 2,000 today. And what's interesting about it is it's not actually a bunch of people in Florida. It's a small collection of LLCs in these kind of faceless office parks in South Florida that own a significant number of homes in just a couple of neighborhoods on the far east side of Detroit. Yorkshire Woods, Cornerstone Village, Moross Meringue. There's just a handful of neighborhoods where there's this really significant presence of South Florida-based ownership concentrated in just a few LLCs. And across those three neighborhoods that I mentioned, it's more than 10% of all housing stock that's owned by some company in South Florida. The other thing that you notice with those South Florida-owned homes is that the tax delinquency rates are very high, which is never a good sign. I think it's something like 1 in 4 of the homes on the east side that are owned in South Florida are tax delinquent. And so, all of that, that combination of concentrated ownership in a small number of LLCs, obviously at a significant distance from the city, high rates of tax delinquency are all pretty concerning. I'm not sure exactly what the phenomenon is behind that interest on the east side of Detroit in particular. I've looked at a couple of these LLCs. Interestingly, they don't seem to own property in other cities. It's not like, it's Detroit and Cleveland and, a handful of other cities that they're investing in. It seems pretty concentrated in Detroit. But I think there's definitely something going on there, and there's some signs that start my alarm bells ringing that there could be an issue in the future, especially when you see delinquency rates that high.
Yeah, especially. I mean, it's bad enough to, we don't want delinquency, but when you're out of state taking up things that could be used by Detroiters and still not paying your bills on it, well, that's a tough spot to be in, Alex. But one of the benefits that we have seen, and this was reflected in the data also, is home ownership going up in Detroiters. What do those numbers look like, and what do you think's behind that trend of increased ownership in the city?
Yeah, so, if you look at just the number of housing units that are owned in Detroit today versus 5 years ago, that's up about 12%. Which is really encouraging to see. So you're seeing, not just a sort of a pullback in out-of-state ownership. There's been some decline in ownership of Detroit housing stock in Michigan, outside of Detroit as well. And you're seeing this increase of Detroiter control of Detroit housing stock over the last few years. I think there's a lot of things behind that. I think certainly one of them is probably the rental ordinance and changes that have been happening in rental registration, certificates of compliance. Although those things are very spottily enforced, and there's been a lot of confusion and pushback, I think you have seen investors sort of pulling back from the city and saying, we just don't want to deal with this. And there's been pretty, regular reporting on investors unloading their portfolios of property or trying to unload their portfolios of Detroit property. And it seems like maybe some of that is coming back into, Detroit, that housing stock is coming back under Detroit control. I think that's overall a good thing, is local control of the housing stock, people who are closer to the housing stock, owning it, even if they're renting it out. Again, I think is better than a lot of homes owned by LLCs in South Florida, for example. And so, I think that's been interesting to see and encouraging to see. And one of the other things that's very notable about it is, when you look at where there is ownership of non-owner occupied properties, so properties that appear to be rental homes in Detroit owned by somebody in the same zip code. Not somebody owning a home that they're renting out on the other side of the city, but living in the same zip code and renting a home out. When you look at those concentrations on a map, they overlap very clearly with a number of Detroit neighborhoods with large immigrant populations. So you see Springwells Village, Southwest Detroit, Chadsey-Condon, Banglatown, Davison, all as real significant concentrations of people who are owning what appear to be rental properties and living close by to those rental properties as well.
Okay, right. Well, one of the things that you bring up there that is great to hear is this rise in home ownership being correlated with actual policy changes, right? Showing how making changes to structure can have an appreciable impact on our communities. And it's one of the reasons why I kind of want to get into this idea of we're doing this process now. Maybe what would it take to lower the percentage of speculator-owned homes in Detroit generally? Do you have any thoughts or ideas on that as someone who's gone through the numbers?
Yeah, I think if you're looking at how to reduce speculatively owned properties in the city, I think that the push around the land value tax is certainly a component of that. There's still thousands of vacant homes that are owned out of state or in Michigan, but beyond Detroit's borders. Those are homes that are very inexpensive to own, and that people can just kind of sit on. You hear of course reports from residents who are frustrated with some absentee owner who's got a vacant home next door to them that's been sitting there for years.
Right.
And so I think that the push around the land value tax would certainly be of benefit there. There are other mechanisms that I think have not gotten much consideration, like specifically a tax on vacancy or something like that. There are other tools that are out there that are probably have less research behind them, but could also be looked at as well.
Yeah. Alex, whenever we talk, right, land value tax, taxing land at a higher rate than the homes and improvements on, it's going to come up, right? I understand it. So we'll keep looking at that. But Alex Alsup, author of the Chargeback Substack, where you frequently write about home buying trends in Detroit, thank you for joining us on the Metro.
Certainly. Thanks so much for having me.
This is the Metro on 101.9 WDET-FM. That was Nick Austin. I'm Tia Graham. Coming up, we'll discuss recent drama in Michigan's GOP. You all stay right there. Welcome back to the Metro right here on 101.9 WDET-FM. Taking a quick look at the weather forecast. Mostly sunny today with a high in the mid to upper 70s. Tomorrow, Tuesday, there's a chance of rain after 2 p.m. with a high near 72 degrees. And today is eclipse day, so be prepared. Make sure you have your glasses on, Detroiters. 2 p.m. is that time. 2 p.m. is that time. Nick?
Yo, I'm glad you want me to have my glasses on too and just don't want to fry my eyes. Thank you so much.
Or you can do what you want,
No, I want my vision. I need to be able to see your lovely visage as well as our next guest. Actually, no, that is making me think it might be a better idea to just stare directly into the sun.
Sometimes the truth is ugly.
Especially when your microphone, unfortunately, isn't on in time to catch the quip. But I did like that one. ML, are you still there, ML?
I am. I'm larger than life and twice as ugly.
All right.
Coming back to the quip strong.
Beautiful. Well, I have this lovely intro prepared for you. So, polls show President Joe Biden and former President Donald Trump are in a dead heat nationally. And as a result, swing states like us right here in Michigan, ML, are receiving more and more attention from the parties as they try to sway voters. Normally, the state party organizations play a pivotal role in helping with that effort, but this year, it seems the continued dispute over leadership within the Michigan GOP between Christina Caramo and newly elected party chair Pete Hoekstra threatened these efforts. So, to learn more about the latest dispute that we thought was resolved, as well as what it might mean for conservatives in the state, we're joined by ML Elrick. He is an investigative reporter with the Detroit Free Press and host of the ML Soul of Detroit podcast. ML, welcome to the Metro.
It's great to be here, and I have to say, we thought this would be over.
I did.
This is the same party who thinks the 2020 election is still going on. Nothing is. It's over when we say it's over.
Right.
I mean, it's like Animal House without the harmless hijinks and of course, vandalism.
Yeah, well, let's get into what's happening here, because for those who might be paying attention, tracking along with us, last time we discussed it on the show, ML, we discussed how a Michigan judge had ruled Christina Caramo must comply with the vote that made Pete Hoekstra chair of the party, and she told the Detroit Free Press that she would do so. So what's the latest, and is she complying?
Well, that's always the question with Christina Caramo. She's a real puzzle because she's not great at returning phone calls or messages, so it's very difficult to find out what's going on with her. Now, if you run into her somewhere, she'll answer just about any question you come up with, and in that way, it's a real conundrum. It's not like she doesn't have something to say. It's just hard to get her somewhere to say it. So we're told that she's going to abide by the judge's ruling, which is great because she doesn't abide by anybody else's rulings on elections where she's been defeated. But now we're hearing Pete Hoekstra say that the Republican Party doesn't have access to its social media, to its accounts where it communicates with the masses. And this is something that was broken by our competition at the Detroit News. A very good story, but it's something I've been covering very closely for the past couple of years. And since I came back to the Free Press 2 years ago, I've been up to my neck in this civil war in the Republican Party. And this is the kind of infighting we're used to seeing among Democrats, but with the Republicans, they're tearing each other apart.
All right. Well, why is this actually important then, right? I mean, how much of an impact should we expect, first of all, on the national level, the state GOP to play? Do they play a role there? And as well locally, I know they want to win the House, for example, Michigan House in the fall. Are we seeing any actual impact? How important is this?
Sure. When you talk about the swing states being up for grabs, the battleground states, and Michigan is at the heart of it. If Michigan had gone a couple other votes in the other direction, Trump never would have been president in 2016. Biden did better than Hillary Clinton did in 2020, and winning Michigan helped him become president. If he can't do that again in Michigan, if Trump does even better than he has the last two times, he'll take Michigan. He'll probably be elected president. When you have a close race, you can't afford to have anything dragging on you. And when you have a significant portion of your base that feels disenfranchised, that's embittered, that doesn't trust the people who are saying we got to go out as a party and do this, you put yourself at grievous risk of harm. I suspect the people who support Caramo will vote for Trump no matter what. But down the ticket, it's going to get tricky. Their House candidates, their Senate candidates, their U.S. Senate candidates, their U.S. House candidates, they may pay a price if the state party says this is our person. And the party that feels like they're the true Republicans, they're not the rhinos, if they feel like they've been cut out of the action, they may just pass those spots on the ballot. And to try and give the party a chance, former Governor Rick Snyder's been raising a ton of money to try and take back the House. Of course, Christina Caramo and her people think Rick Snyder is the devil, so they may not do what he says. And if they don't do what he says, that's great news for Democrats.
Yeah. So we'll have to keep monitoring this. I know that you are also, but I also mentioned that you have the podcast ML Soul of Detroit. I'd be remiss if I didn't bring that up because I know you're pretty proud of it. But it does have ML in the title, which I think might be a little gauche to put your own name in the title of your podcast. This isn't Tia Graham's The Metro. You know what I mean? Like this is so. What's behind that naming? What is the soul of Detroit?
If Paco Rabanne can put his name on that fine fragrance, I think I can put my initials on one of the most outstanding behind-the-scenes journalism podcasts in the history of since Marconi did his thing.
You know, I was thinking about Marconi, and I was like, have I heard anything better than the ML Soul of Detroit podcast since then? And you know. That will be a question for another time when we have you back in studio.
Well, we do take people behind the scenes and explain to them why this craziness is going on, just like you do, in a way that doesn't always fit into a newspaper column. We want to take people where they don't go otherwise, just like the Metro.
I love that, ML. You know what? You can come back on the show. ML Elrick, Detroit Free Press investigative reporter, thank you for joining us on the Metro.
Always a pleasure. I'm getting off at the next stop, by the way.
This is the Metro, right here on 101.9 WDET-FM, and Ramadan ends this week. And while it's normally a celebratory time, this year, American Muslims say they are observing Ramadan in grief rather than joy as the war in Gaza continues. WDET's Nargis Rahman spoke with Muslims from around Metro Detroit to learn more about what Ramadan was like for them this year.
It's a chilly Thursday morning in southwest Detroit during Ramadan, the month of fasting from dawn until dusk for Muslims. Off of Verner Highway, a retail store called Nice Price is equipped with a collection of home goods and Ramadan decorations. Ahmed Hassan is the co-owner of the store. He says around this time of year, customers usually shop for Ramadan and Eid decor. But this year, people are leaning more inward.
This year feels a little bit different because although we had sales of Ramadan decorations, but there's a little bit of shift for people coming closer to their faith with everything, in the midst of everything going on, you know.
Nice Price has 5 locations across Metro Detroit, many of which are in Arab and Muslim communities. Hassan says people are opting to buy more spiritual items this year rather than the usual decor of lights and signs.
People buying Quran, buying prayer rugs, turning really to their faith for some comfort.
Hassan is one of 8 siblings. His father immigrated from Palestine to Zarqa, Jordan in the 1950s following the 1948 war. Hassan was brought up in Jordan until his family moved to Metro Detroit in 1997. He says this year, the war in Gaza is top of mind for many people.
With the events that are happening and the genocide that's happening in Gaza, it brings a different feeling to many Muslim Americans, Arab Americans here in the United States, in the sense that we're hopeful and we're waiting for Ramadan to bring us a little bit of comfort from a holiness point of view.
In Gaza, more than 31,000 people have been killed by Israeli forces following the October 7th attack, in which Hamas killed 1,200 Israelis and took 200 hostages. Hassan says that's why simply breaking his fast this year has been exceptionally hard.
Our first dinner on the first day of Ramadan was not an easy dinner. Having food on the table, trying to eat after fasting a long day for the first time in a year. All you can think of is on the other side of the world, there are children that sit at dinner table every night but have nothing on it. So that's really what goes through many of us in their mind.
The United Nations says Palestinians do not have enough food or water, leading them to the brink of famine. Some Muslims in Gaza are breaking their fast with animal fodder, grass, and boiling seawater to survive. Others are not able to break their fast at all. Raisa Fatima is a law student at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. She too feels saddened by the ongoing crisis in Gaza.
I feel immensely grateful and also a tremendous amount of guilt as I'm breaking my fast, because no matter how challenging my day is, it's not even comparable to what the people in Gaza are experiencing now. It's very different when your hunger is intentional versus, when it's forced upon you by something like war and occupation.
She says this year's gatherings have a different feel.
A lot of times there's a hint of celebration to Ramadan and having iftar parties and, coming together as a community in joy. Whereas a lot of the communal spaces this year are bonded in grief and not celebration.
Fatima says she's fasting with a smaller Muslim community this year. Usually, she's at home with her family, having iftar together, and going to the mosque for prayers. But this year, Fatima has asked her non-Muslim peers to support her Ramadan experience by participating in a solidarity fast for Gaza.
We put together a solidarity fast for Gaza, and we're ending the day with a community iftar. So we've asked a lot of our friends to join us in this fast and to join us in our reflection and our grief.
Fatima says she hopes things get better after Ramadan, but things aren't looking up now. Like Fatima, Detroiter Janae Wilson is looking for intentional ways to connect with community. Wilson says she feels a shift in how the Muslim community, about 300,000 people in Michigan, are observing Ramadan. She says more people are attending spiritual gatherings. Wilson says she too is spending more time at the mosque.
I used to be out late, but I was out late going to festivals or going to coffee shops. Now this year, I'm out late going to the masjid or like a sister's house for us to all connect.
This year, even the Ramadan Sahur Festival, which attracts thousands of people in Dearborn, has been canceled. It's one of the largest Ramadan gatherings in Michigan. Wilson, who works for Prosper Us, is a convert to Islam. One of the reasons she was drawn to the religion is in watching how people overcome challenges with their faith. She says right now people are attempting to heal, especially due to the increase of anti-Muslim and anti-Arab rhetoric and discrimination in the U.S. following the siege of Gaza.
Because we're under such deep attack, and to like heal with each other and bond with each other. Like if we have broken bonds, like apologizing to each other, forgiving each other, ensuring that we see that this world is so short and how much can we give back in this world is so limited.
Ahmed Hassan, Raisa Fatima, and Janae Wilson say while Ramadan is somber this year, there's also a new sense of humility, community, and gratefulness that hasn't been felt before. As Ramadan is coming to an end this week with Eid al-Fitr, they say they hope that peace comes soon for those who are suffering in the world.
That was WDET's Nargis Rahman reporting and exploring what Ramadan looks like for Metro Detroiters this year. This is the Metro.
It's 1019 WDET as you are listening to the Metro, and coming up, we'll talk about how the NFL draft will change the physical makeup of Detroit. This is the Metro on 1019 WDET. I'm Nick Austin.
And I'm Tia Graham, and I think about the way the city's going to change that physical makeup. We've seen murals go up, we've seen beautiful art, all types of different things that are happening in the city of Detroit because the NFL draft has been taking the NFL has been taking the draft on the road since 2015, and its next stop is, of course, the Motor City. There's a lot of buzz surrounding the event as the city is offering free events, activities, festivities all weekend long, and many of them easily walkable for those willing and able. But with all of the commotion comes traffic, lots of it. And road closures are happening as we speak, including along East Jefferson for the construction of the NFL Draft Experience at Hart Plaza. Joining the show to discuss how people should prepare to navigate the city during the NFL Draft, we have Sam Krasenstein. Sam is Detroit's Chief of Infrastructure. Sam, thank you so much for joining us on the Metro.
Hey, good morning, Tia. How are you?
Doing really, really well. So a lot of planning goes into these road closures for an event of this scale. What kind of planning went into this one?
Well, we've been planning for the NFL draft event for the better part of a year now, from everything from the infrastructure improvements downtown that we're doing to the traffic closure plan and overall just transportation plan for how people get around both during the build out of the event and then during the event itself.
And Sam, what were some of the things that you all did construction-wise to get the roads ready for the NFL draft?
So we decided that this was a really good time to make a generational investment downtown so that we're not just doing things that are going to be here for, the 3 days of fun during the draft, but that are going to be here and support Detroiters over the next decade and coming years. So we did everything from paving the streets downtown to replacing damaged sidewalks, refreshing all of the light poles, and making investments in our public transit infrastructure with the People Mover downtown. So it's been a lot of really exciting investments downtown that are going to be here well beyond the lifespan of the draft event.
I actually just saw on Twitter a few of the street signs that are going up, kind of showing new directions. And it's really, really cool, really sleek. And it's really, really showing that the city of Detroit, as well as other organizations, are really working hard to show what the city has to offer. So what are some major road closures that people should look out for, especially starting today?
So we're taking a very phased approach to how we're doing the road closures downtown. We know that having an event like this downtown is disruptive, but we're doing it in a phased approach so that we're not taking up any more space than we need for each section of the footprint. So today marks our phase 2 of our road closure plan. So today, northbound Woodward is closed in the downtown area up to Campus Martius. Cadillac Square is closed. And that's really it for phase 2. Phase 1 closed southbound Randolph, but we're still keeping the footprint pretty small. Mm-hmm. I would say the biggest closures will start next Monday on April 15th when we close East Jefferson for the build-out of the NFL Draft Experience that's going to be down at Hart Plaza.
And do we know how long that stretch is going to be then down just in front of Hart Plaza?
Yep. So that stretch of Jefferson is going to be closed from April 15th through May 7th.
Wow.
Part of the reason it's so long is we're taking that as an opportunity to do some of the project support that we need for the Grand Prix happening in early June. So we're taking advantage of, having all of the traffic closure devices set up and everything so that we're not having to inconvenience residents and businesses longer than necessary.
So when I think about the NFL draft itself, and this is a large-scale event that the city is offering, and I think about other large-scale events that the city has hosted before. So, how does it compare to other large events that the city has hosted in the past?
Well, everyone who I talk to compares it to the Super Bowl. I wasn't here in Detroit when we did the Super Bowl, so I don't have that as a comparison. But for as long as I've worked for the city since 2016, this is definitely the biggest event that I've been a part of.
And what would you say, compared to other things that you've been a part of in the city of Detroit, how big is this?
I think this is much bigger. I mean, we're used to holding big events downtown, everything from, the Taylor Swift concert to having the Tigers and Red Wings play at the same time. So we're used to having big events with, the regular sporting events, from concerts, from when we do tree lighting and fireworks. So we're used to dealing with a large number. We're used to dealing with large numbers of people, but I think end of April is going to be really special for how many people it brings to the city. That includes Detroiters, people from Metro Detroit, and people from all over the country that will be visiting.
Nice. So Sam, you saw some of the other things that you were talking about. Some of the public transit that's going to be available. You have MDOT, you have the People Mover, of course, you have rideshare collaborations happening, and you also have shuttles as well. So get into that.
So we'll be releasing more about the shuttle services on Thursday. We'll be doing a press conference to announce some of the transportation options for getting downtown. But basically our whole strategy is we know there's a lot of road closures in the central business district, but it's not a reason not to come down to the city. There's a ton of parking available throughout the area, and we're offering shuttles and public transit and buses to be able to move people where you don't need to drive downtown and pay a premium for parking. You can park a little bit further away and take the Q line, take the People Mover, take a shuttle, and it can be very easy to get down here. All
right, Sam, overall, what would you want residents and visitors to take away as they're coming downtown, they're driving, they're parking, and they're just getting themselves together? Some of just the rundown, I guess you can say, for those who are ready to start the NFL draft April 25th.
So, the biggest thing is just to plan ahead and to have a plan for coming downtown. It doesn't matter if you're visiting for the first time or if you're down here every day for work or visiting every weekend. The footprint's going to be a little bit different than people are used to. So I encourage people to, check Google Maps, check Waze, know what roads are going to be closed, and then have a plan for where you're going to park and how you're going to get down here.
That was Sam Krasenstein, Chief of Infrastructure for the City of Detroit. Thank you so much for informing us, letting us know what we need to know before we go to the NFL draft. And we'll also let our listeners know about the shuttle service once it's announced this Thursday. Sam, thank you so much for joining us on The Metro.
Thanks for having me, Tia.
Awesome. For more information, head to visitdetroit.com. The NFL Draft is happening throughout downtown Detroit, April 25th through April 27th.
This is the Metro on 1019 WDET. That's Tia Graham. I'm Nick Austin. And coming up, we'll discuss why many Michiganders are frustrated by the state's auto insurance laws.
This is the Metro. And Nick, just taking a little beat there, thinking about car insurance, auto insurance. I think every time I pay it, why is it so high?
There are a lot of reasons behind that, Tia, and while I could give you a long dissertation on it, it might be a little bit frustrating, but it's something that we have been discussing here in the state a lot. No-fault auto insurance laws, which are really at the base of why we have high rates, have been stuck in a legislative web, and that's especially been true since the Michigan Supreme Court made a ruling in 2019 that had an impact on legislative changes that were attempted. WDET's Shayna Roth and Gongwer News Services' Zach Gorchow sat down with Chad Livengood of the Detroit News to unpack the status of the current no-fault auto bill and to discuss why many are unhappy with our current auto insurance laws.
You've been following this issue for years. You've done a lot of really great, enterprising reporting on it. But what has been the most surprising thing to you about this and where we are now in 2024?
You know, I think back to when I first started covering this issue, 2012, covering it when it would, there would be a hearing. I eventually called it the no-fault fire drill, and it would almost happen every 6 months. You could almost set your watch to it, where an insurance committee chair would try to hold hearings and try to get a bill going, and they did this particularly under Republican control in those years. That was the Bolger term back then. So Pete Lund was the chair of the House Insurance Committee, hold a committee, and they would just, they'd go up to 519 and they would just get packed with people in wheelchairs. And the people in wheelchairs had a tremendous voice, it seemed, and any movement on trying to rein in no fault or create a fee schedule, even things as simple as a fraud authority. They could never seem to get anything going. Sometimes it was the doing of the legislative leadership. They would try to package everything all into one. They couldn't just do the fraud authority by itself. They just had to. It seemed like they were going for the whole pie every time, and so. They just kept failing, and then Mike Duggan gets elected mayor of Detroit. He makes this his issue. He introduces de-insurance, and they continue to try to do these different iterations of some kind of reform bill. It obviously 2019 it kind of finally came to a head. And at the time, I was reporting in Cranes about how this system really was kind of like collapsing in many ways. There was at that time in 2018, 2/3 of the lawsuits, civil litigation in Oakland County was for auto no fault. I mean, the whole name of auto no fault was meant to say that no one is at fault and all bills get paid and you're trying to stay out of court. And what had happened was the whole system was becoming so litigious that there really was a reason to reform it. What we got, I think, it leaves a lot to be desired for a lot of individuals, particularly if you rely on this system if you have the terrible misfortune of getting in a horrific car accident and you need long-term care. The system that has been left for people is not anywhere near what people had enjoyed or relied upon for decades.
Chad, this is a law that Democrats and Republicans voted on, but you've called it a Republican-authored bill. Can you explain that? Because I know recently on social media, some people have gotten a little bit huffy about you framing that way, but I know you have very specific and good reason for that.
Yeah, I mean, well, one, the Republicans were in control of the gavel. Yes, it did have a very big bipartisan win, but the way that they came at the specific major, I will call it a flaw in this law, is this 45% cut in reimbursement rates to home health care companies. And basically any company that doesn't have a service that revolves around a Medicare billing rate, which is a really bureaucratic way of saying Medicare has a whole list of fee schedule that the federal government sets. This is what we're going to pay for an MRI. This is what we're going to pay to set a broken leg. This is what we will pay for your physical therapy if you sustain really bad whiplash or whatnot in a car accident. And what happened was there was all these other forms of care, including 101 personal home care that involves, for some people, showering them, toiletries, feeding them, keeping them alive, literally running a ventilator in their home, because the alternative is that they have to go live in a nursing home. And these people range in age from as young as infants and all the way up to people in their 80s who need care day to day, hour to hour, minute by minute, in some cases. And the inherent flaw with the legislation was that they simply didn't have a Medicare billing code to say we're going to pay 200% of the Medicare. So they came up with this 45% cut across the board, and this was introduced as a substitute on the floor of the House less than 24 hours before the bill passed. And you might recall, this bill passed on a Friday before Memorial Day, and highly unusual, almost rare, wouldn't you say?
Very rare.
Friday session, in order to get this bill passed, because everyone wanted to get this done so they could go up to Mackinac Island, an island with no cars, ironically, and sign a bill for auto insurance reform at the Mackinac Policy Conference the next week. And so it was a Republican-authored bill. The Democrats did get a lot of input. Democratic amendments were gavelled down. I don't think there's any denial that the Republicans authored this, and a Democratic governor signed it.
That was Zach Gorchow and Shayna Roth speaking with Chad Livengood. You can listen to Mishmash on WDET State Politics Podcast wherever you get your podcasts. It's the Metro on 1019 WDET, and coming up, we are going to take a look at the rise in women's basketball, especially following the tournament win for South Carolina when we return. It's the Metro on 1019 WDET. I'm Nick Austin.
And I'm Tia Graham. Forecast, of course, weather. Mostly sunny with a high around 70 degrees today. Tomorrow, there's a chance of rain after 2 p.m. Otherwise, a high around 72 degrees. And Wednesday, it's going to be mostly sunny with a high around 66. I believe it is spring. And spring brings so many different things like March Madness. The South Carolina Gamecocks are now the NCAA women's basketball champions. The undefeated Gamecocks beat the Iowa Hawkeyes last night, a team led by superstar Caitlin Clark. The final score, 87-75. NPR's A. Martinez spoke with ESPN's Jesse Washington about how big of a deal the game really was.
Jesse, it never seemed once, at least to me, that South Carolina was ever in danger. They controlled that game from the moment the tip-off happened to the end.
Yeah, I was a little worried in the first quarter, though, because Caitlin Clark was doing Caitlin Clark things and hitting threes in people's faces and getting to the rim. But as soon as they got close to halftime and Raven Johnson, the point guard from South Carolina, actually stole the ball from Caitlin off her dribble and went in for a layup, put South Carolina up, they never trailed after that.
Yeah, they out-rebounded Iowa by 22, so their size was a huge advantage. It's an undefeated season for South Carolina, though, and the third championship in the last 7 seasons for Coach Dawn Staley. I mean, she's one of the greats of all time now.
Well, I think what we saw in that game yesterday was the birth of a dynasty. And move over UConn. Tennessee is way in the rear view. South Carolina is reloading year after year. They bring almost their whole team back. Dawn Staley, this is her third championship joining a select group. And her program is just humming on all cylinders. Last year, they went undefeated and lost to Iowa in the semis. They graduated 5 starters and still came back and went undefeated the next season. It's really amazing.
Yeah, you mentioned Caitlin Clark, who had 30 points. I mean, what does she mean to the sport? And her next move, which will be the WNBA, I mean, what does that potentially mean for women's basketball?
Yeah, that's been a big storyline around this tournament, how they're getting so many viewers. The semifinal game between Iowa and UConn got 16 million folks watching on television online. That's more than every World Series game last year, more than the NBA Finals. And so Caitlin really elevated the sport with her excitement, with her unbelievable ability to put the ball in the basket from anywhere, it seemed like. And it goes to show that you're truly a great, great player if you score 30 points and you lose, she should have done more. So what she's meant is really getting women's college basketball the attention it deserves. And when she goes to the league, this is probably going to continue. People are going to want to watch her see. The WNBA is on an upswing, and Caitlin Clark is just going to be rocket fuel for that.
And timing, too. Momentum is all about timing. In this case, the WNBA draft is next Monday in Brooklyn. Fans will be allowed to be at the draft for the first time since 2016. It's going to be on live at ESPN. Indiana Fever has the first pick. They'll probably make Caitlin Clark the first pick. I mean, it's feeling like the WNBA is really going to take another step up after this.
Yeah, I hope so. And they should, and they deserve it. Man, it's great basketball. Yeah. It's great basketball. There's a men's game in NCAA championship game, and
when is that?
We're not
Today?
even thinking about it. Yeah, Purdue, UConn, remember them? But women's basketball has eclipsed. See what I did there? The men's game at this moment. And it's just, it's an amazing thing to see.
Yeah, by the way, that's UConn, Purdue, a couple of big centers, Donovan Clingan and Zach Edney. They're both 7-footers. They're going to go up against each other. I guess if you want to pay attention to that, you can, right?
You can if you want to. I will. It'll be cool.
Yeah, me too.
That was NPR's A. Martinez speaking with ESPN's Jesse Washington about South Carolina's win last night. And just thinking about that right now, UConn and Purdue do face off tonight in the finals of the NCAA men's basketball tournament. UConn is hoping to repeat after winning the tournament last year. The Huskies beat Alabama in the Final Four on Saturday. It was a tough defeat for Alabama coach Nate Oates, and I'm thinking that game starts at 9:30 tonight, Nick. I won't be there.
All right, well, that's all right.
Sleeping.
Well, the game I'm looking at is Music versus Ryan Patrick Hooper, host of In the Groove, which is coming up at noon. What you got for us, Ryan?
It is a battle every day, Nick. Fighting against these beats, these tunes, these melodies. Lots of new stuff. It's always fun coming out of a weekend and diving into so much new music and just counting down the minutes until I can start In the Groove and share it all with you. Plus, you got to do an Eclipse mix today. So
Bonnie Tyler.
No, we're not doing that. Nothing on the nose here, folks. We're going to go a little deeper, get a little spacey. That's going to be the final hour of In the Groove, getting you ready for that Eclipse today on WDET.
Yeah. Ryan, are you a WrestleMania fan?
Yes.
Did you see that last night?
Yes.
Oh, I love that. Oh my gosh, I love that. Nick, you?
I did.
I love this. That's the Metro
Nerds
for April.
unite.
I love it so much. That's the Metro for April 8th. You can listen to recent episodes online at WDET.org. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform.
The show is produced by Sam Corey, David Lyons, and Jack Philbrandt. Our engineer is Nate Bender.
The Metro is a production of WDET, a listener-supported service of Wayne State University. And if you like what you hear and want to support the Metro, consider becoming a member at WDET.org.
This is WDET-FM, Detroit Public Radio, your connection to news, music, and conversation. Thanks for listening. And the reign of Cody Rhodes begins now, WWE Champion.
See, I don't know what any of that is, but I'm here for it.